Hello, welcome to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine, where this week we're chatting to BP Walter, who has published 5 books over the last few years and is getting 2 out this year. Busy. We talk about why he stays away from absolutist ideas of character, also why he starts the day by immediately escaping, and how working as a bookseller has helped him finally become a book writer.
And that was lovely because that kept me very much sort of in the midst of the kind of on the pulse of what was coming out, what was working, what was selling. And there are a number of books while I was working in the bookshop in Romford that really helped crystallise my ideas as to what I wanted to write, particularly S.J. Watson's book Before I Go to Sleep and Paula Hawkins' The Girl on the Train. Both of those had very big moments while I was a bookseller. So that was really helpful. And the spending a lot of time writing was really helpful.
It's all on the way with BP Walter in this week's Writer's Routine. Yes, welcome along. My name is Dan Simpson, and this is Writer's Routine, where we take a look through an author's working day. That's what it says on the tin. We see how they get ideas, how they plan their whole day to give them the best chance of getting that plot down. This week, we are with BP Walter. Barnaby has published 5 thrillers in the last 5 years, I think, there or thereabouts. His new one is The Garden Party, which is set in a celebration for a wealthy family, where the son, Raphael, and his fiancée are toasting their new engagement. Only at that moment, Raphael's adopted brother decides to expose what he really thinks about the family that has taken them in. All the secrets at the heart of their home. And soon the bodies start to fall. Think Saltburn meets Agatha Christie. I think it's a brilliantly contrasting and fantastic way to pitch this one. We talk about why he enjoys writing about wealthy families and how he manages to avoid stock stereotypes in there, and how he stays away from absolutes. Now, Barnaby spent his childhood and teenage years reading compulsively. He worked in bookshops, he studied film and English at uni, he went to the Faber Academy, he's worked for Waterstones, so he's been around books forever, really. It makes sense that he's become an author. We find out how that actually came about. Was it the result of years and years of trying, as we heard with Amy Neff last week on the show? Was it a bit more streamlined than that? Also, how has he dealt with the pressure of it finally happening? How did he make the switch, and how has he found the switch to being a full-time writer? You can hear as well why he always needs something on in the background whenever he's working. It's a film, it's a TV show, it's even an audiobook. Something will be on to slightly distract him at the time of immense concentration. And on that, actually, Barnaby predicts he will say a lot that might upset you and upset what you think about the way writers should work. And I said he's in the middle of a busy year. He's just had The Garden Party published. He's also gearing up for his horror debut, Scuttle, which is released this autumn. You can hear all about why those two things are happening pretty much at the same time, too. There's a lot going on this week's chat with BP Walter, and we start, as we always do, with what he sees around him in the place where he sits down to write.
I'm normally in one of 2 places within the flat in which I live. I do have a room in which I write, which is kind of curated to be as warm and sort of cozy environment as I can possibly have it. So one of the main benefits of the room in which I usually write is that it's got a blackout blind. And I'm probably going to say a bunch of things that other writers and various people will flinch at within this conversation. But one of the things I absolutely can't stand is daylight. I'm aware I sound vampiric, but I love my blackout blind so I can bring it down and I would not know what time of day it is outside. And that for me is the absolute goal. So I have very warm lighting. All the bulbs are very warm, and I actually have fairy lights all around the room. They don't twinkle unless it's Christmas. So they're season neutral, kind of clear cord, very warm light fairy lights. And when it's autumn, they have autumnal leaves. And when it's Christmas, they twinkle. But the rest of the year, they're static and they're on. And I have some desk lamps. And on the wall, I have framed pictures of my book covers, which kind of suits like it serves as inspiration really if I ever struggle, which is relatively rare, but I can look up at those and think, oh, I have done this before. So that's the general writing room. If it's a very dark, dull, grey day, and there isn't any sunlight in sight, I may go to the kitchen or to the lounge and write on one of the sofas, because we have quite large windows and they let in all the sun. And I know some people like this sunshine business, but it isn't for me. It really isn't. And contrary to public belief, we do get a lot of sunshine in England. So if it is a wonderful day, and for me that's a very dark, grey day, I will be in the living room probably, enjoying the dark greyness. But yes, that's the general environment. It depends on the weather.
When did you first discover your hatred of sunshine?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think it might track back to my childhood, and we're at risk of this becoming a therapy session, but I think it's because the things I loved to do as a child were quite indoor activities, usually reading books or watching films. And you can, of course, read a book outside, and if you really wanted to, you could watch a film outside on a portable device, but I wouldn't recommend it. But I kind of see those as indoor things. So when it was like a sunny day, it would often mean, my parents were lovely. They would take me and my sister to like lovely places and that kind of thing. And we'd go outside and, to the beach, to the garden, that kind of thing. And I did enjoy all those things. I don't want to give like a false version of my childhood. I did have a lovely time, but often going outside with me coming away from the things I love to do, which was reading and watching films. So I think I, as a child, would wake up, see the bright sunny day and realize there was competition for my time to do the things that I really loved. So it might be that, but that could be me just kind of being sort of exaggerating the introspection going on there. It might have nothing to do with that. I could just be quite light sensitive. I don't know. But if I had to guess, I'd say it's probably to do with that.
Have you always realised it was a problem whilst you were working? I mean, when you were at school or college or whatever it is, and you would be doing essays, would you always need darkness then?
I'd usually have, the curtains closed in my room at uni, and I was very unlucky in my halls of accommodation at university because it faced, I don't know which side of the campus it faced, but it faced towards the sun. It felt like I had perpetual daylight, whereas my friend Emma had a wonderful room with a tree outside and rarely got much daylight in. So I wish I had swapped with her. But I've always, if I see that it's a sunny day, my mood plummets, whereas if it's a grey day, I'm very optimistic and I really enjoy the work a lot more. So I'm kind of the inverse of most normal people really when it comes to that. But my productivity is much better if it isn't sunny.
Now, I've done like over 300 episodes, right? So I've spoken to a lot of authors, and that's the first time anyone has ever mentioned how much they hate sunlight.
I know I am odd. I joke with my partner that if we ever won the Euro Millions or anything like that, we would kind of build a house, and I would have a writing wing that had no windows. That would be the absolute aim. Kind of a side of a building with no windows. But not yet.
So when you're in your writing cave with your blackout windows, what is there around you apart from the books that reminds you what you're there to do? So plot points and post-it notes and whiteboards, that kind of thing. What drives the story when you're sat there?
I actually don't have anything like that in the physical realm. I have a lot of those things, particularly like plans and notes and that kind of stuff on the computer, on the laptop in front of me. But I don't put anything like that around me. I wouldn't describe myself as a neat freak, but I'd say I like things pleasantly tidy. And I have to have a relatively uncluttered environment around me. Sometimes the clutter does start to appear and then I have to kind of shift it away. But normally I like the desk to be relatively free from anything like that, anything too distracting. And it's I'm going for calm and aesthetically pleasing. That's my general approach. And I do, in both the writing room and in the lounge, have a big TV, and that is integral to my writing process. And when we get onto the main kind of nitty gritty of the routine, we'll talk about that. But the TV is often on when I'm writing, and so I have to have a big TV in the room.
So if it is just you and your laptop, what form does your plotting and your notes take on there? Is it kind of spread out into folders? Is there a big spreadsheet that exists on Excel or something?
I have what I kind of call sort of the book's Bible, and that I don't have a spreadsheet, and I usually just have one document that's separate to the main manuscript, and that kind of Bible doc is a full cast list of the book, where I've kind of got mini bios of every character within the book. And I also have little pictures that I've cut out from TV and film, or even things like adverts, of people that I think look like those characters. And I've got that. So I make sure I've got that open when I'm writing my book. And within that same document, there is a chapter by chapter plan. So I always know where I'm going. I really plot everything forensically in advance. And I usually have both docs open, sometimes split across the screen so I can go between them really easily. And I quite often will write the book out of order, but go back to the chapter plan and highlight all the chapters as I'm going along, so I don't get lost as to where I'm up to. So those things are really important to me, but I like to keep them quite relatively kind of condensed within one document, rather than lots of different things, which would frighten me, I think.
So if it is all quite condensed, I guess, how simplistic is that plotting? Is it just a few words for each thing that's happening, for each chapter, for each big plot point, character movement? Is it more thorough than that?
It is more thorough, and actually I should probably redact and retract the word condensed, because I think my agent would probably find it funny, considering I sometimes send her like 16,000 word plans of novels. But it's condensed in my eyes, but sometimes the documents are very long. I try with the chapter plan that goes through every chapter I plan to write within the book. I don't always stick to it, but generally that's how it is. I try to keep each chapter kind of a paragraph within the plan. Sometimes those paragraphs can become pages. If it's one of the chapters where kind of big things happen, like this is a kind of a pivotal chapter where the whole world of the kind of novel hinges upon it, they can get quite lengthy. But normally I try to keep it within the kind of length of sort of a medium to long paragraph, just so I don't end up kind of writing the whole novel and then writing it again. I usually wake up at around 6:50 a.m, between kind of 6:50 and 7 a.m, and my partner goes to work at about 7:15. So I usually wake up, and one of the very first things I do before I do anything creative, I usually either watch a film, if time allows, or I watch an episode of my morning TV show of that time. And the morning TV show has to be something fairly nice. I'm a big fan of crime dramas, but it isn't normally that. It either has to be something like Downton Abbey, or at the moment I'm going through the early 2000s Scottish set drama Monarch of the Glen. I'm really loving that. I watched all that when I was a child, but I'm enjoying going back to that. And it's just a really nice kind of 50 minutes or an hour of escapism, just to kind of, start the day, prep the day. I love knowing exactly what I'm doing as soon as I wake up. So that's normally how it begins. My partner goes off to work during that, and then once I've done that episode, I'll normally go out for a run. By that point it's probably about kind of 7:50 or 8 o'clock. I'll go out for a run, and I'll get an iced coffee drink during that run, and come back with that, and I will quite often then go straight into the writing. I may, if I've got some email stuff to do, or pressing important things to do with social media, I might do some of that first, but I do like to get straight into the writing, because I really feel like then you've kind of broken ground, as kind of builders would, or architects might say. I feel like I've really sort of started the work, and it is my favourite part of the work, the writing, really. So, and I do enjoy the other peripheral activities, but the writing is the bit that really makes me feel like I've achieved that day. So I'll often write probably until about 10:30 or 11 a.m. and then I'll need a break, and that normally involves going to the leisure centre, the sports centre near me, and I'll either go for a swim or a gym, and I'll do that between half an hour and an hour, and then I'll come back and have some lunch, and then I'll normally go back into the work of some kind, either the writing or the planning or the editing. It depends which stage I'm up to with the book and which other works I've got going on. I'm a bit strange, but I do like to write multiple books at once, and providing I haven't got a really tight deadline, in the afternoon I might try to write a bit of another book, simply because it keeps my brain kind of going between the different worlds. I don't feel like I'm getting tired of a book if I do that. I then can go into it's like going into another room inside my head, really. It's I find it really fulfilling having lots of books on the go at various stages. So in the afternoon I might write another book, or I'll work on some edits for an existing book that's happening, and then probably at around 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. I'll start winding down, and it's around the time my partner gets home from work. While all this is happening, I've mentioned earlier in the day I watch my morning TV show. There are usually TV shows and movies playing on the TV all throughout the day while I'm writing. Or if that's not happening, I'll have an audiobook playing on my phone while I'm writing throughout the day. I realise these two things, I've spoken to other authors before, and some people greet this news with absolute horror. And I used to think I wasn't doing the writing theme properly, but I'm now up to the kind of like book 8 or 9. I now just kind of see this as part of my process, and I need something else happening in the background, some other story. I've tried music, I can't do it. I need either an audiobook or a film or a TV episode or something like that. It has to be fiction, and it usually has to be something I'm familiar with. If I'm doing very light edits or emails or that kind of thing, I could have like a new TV drama like Blue Lights or something like that. But it often has to be something I know the story of. So favourites are old detective series like Inspector Morse or Lewis or A Touch of Frost, or Vera. I'm going through all the Veras at the moment. I'll usually have those on the TV while I'm working, or I'll have an audiobook of a classic novel. Jane Austen is my absolute go-to. Possibly Harry Potter, but I probably would end up just not working and listening to that. Or something like Dickens, or a classic I know the story well of, and it's unlikely to distract me or interrupt me too much. So that's the environment I go for every time I sit down to write. And I'm aware some people find that absolutely awful to hear, but it really does work for me.
There's a lot to pick apart in there, which is brilliant, because sometimes I hear writers' routines and they're pretty by the numbers, and there's not much to go on, but I'm very fascinated in so many aspects. So what does your partner think at the very start of the day when they're going off to an office job? I don't know what it is, and then you're there switching on Downton Abbey?
I think he quite likes it's quite a nice sort of morning routine, because he often has breakfast much earlier than I do. So he'll normally be preparing his breakfast while I'm getting the TV episode sorted. And because it's a fairly nice, cozy show in the morning, there's unlikely to be any kind of like big shootings or post-mortems or anything like that happening in the shows I watch in the morning. Of course, Downton Abbey can have its sad moments, but normally the opening of an episode is fairly low taxing when it comes to anything too emotive. So it creates a nice environment. I just kind of see it as a nice kind of springboard into the day, I think.
And also, I'm aware that quite often these days are composites of different ones, maybe the perfect writing day. But yours seems busy, right? Because you do the run, then you do some work, then you're going off and doing more exercise, and so there's a lot going on. How frequently is this the day that you're having? Does it often go like this for you?
Yes, nearly always. Most of the time, it's an exception if the day changes, and that's how I like it. If I look at a week and realise that I've got more than one day that disrupts that routine, I'm like, oh, it's a busy week. So it generally has to stay like that, and I'm very lucky that it does normally. And if the day does change, it's normally because it's like nice things. It's rarely anything that's like I'm dreading. It's normally because I'm doing something very lovely, like meeting friends or family, or going into London and doing book events or something like that. So I don't mind the interruptions or the changes to the routine, but where I can, I try to make sure most of the week is that perfect kind of day. So it isn't. If there's a week of a lot of disruptions, even if I get the amount of work done I want to get done, it won't feel the same. It will feel like it's been kind of fitted in. Whereas I want the writing to, because it's my job, it's my living. So I want the writing to feel like that's the main bulk of my working time that week.
I would imagine one of the joys of being a writer is being able to do, as in to work when you like and to format your day as you wish it to be. And you've perfectly been able to do that with watching films and TV shows right the way through the day. At what point did you discover that with a full blank canvas for you to be able to write at any point of the day, for you to do whatever you'd like, you do still like this quite particular strict schedule of when is best for you to write?
I think I discovered that when I went to writing full time, which was, it was still sort of lockdown, but I used to work full time up until the release. I think it was around my third book. And I was very lucky. My third book sort of changed my career for me and enabled me to leave my full-time previous job and start writing full-time. And I remember kind of like taking a week of kind of holiday once I'd resigned from my full-time job. I took a week of holiday just to kind of just do nothing. I didn't write, I did nothing. I kind of acted as if it was sort of annual leave, but it's now me that kind of like signs off the annual leave rather than my former employer. So I just took that week just to think about how I was going to craft my routine. And there was probably a bit of a trial and error in the early days. And as I said, this was sort of towards the tail end of lockdown. I think it was in spring 2021 or summer 21. So there was a lot of time spent at home during that period, and I think even without knowing, while I was still working from home in my full-time job, I was probably sussing out how I would go about it. So when I got to that stage, I knew pretty well how I would like to sort of have the beats of my day, if that makes sense, how I'd sort of punctuate it with different things. And it didn't take too long, but it has adapted, it has evolved over time. The order I do things does change a little bit, but that's normally dictated to by which books I'm writing and the order and how quickly they need to be ready, rather than the routine itself. But I'm happy to be flexible and adaptable as long as I've got that general framework there, if that makes sense.
So let's talk about the TV being on all the time, or there being an audiobook happening all the time. I guess quite simply, how is that not distracting for you? How do you strike the balance of, if you're writing crime, it being on, maybe you're a bit inspired by A Touch of Frost or whatever it is, but it's not directly bleeding into whatever it is you're writing?
I think I think the best thing about it is that it removes the silence. I don't like the silence. And I should actually say, on top of all of that, I usually on another device have kind of ambient rain or storm sounds going, as well as the TV or the audiobook as well, just in the background, just to make me think there's like a big storm raging outside. So I usually have that going as well, in order to remove any idea, like any sense of silence happening around me. but in terms of the content of the show, so if I was watching A Touch of Frost or Inspector Morse, I'd never be worried too much about the content bleeding into what I'm writing, because what I'm writing has normally been very heavily planned before in advance. So it's almost like there wouldn't be room for it to enter the world of my book. And I also think, even if I'm not taking direct inspiration from what I'm watching or listening to, I think it just does something to the part of my brain that helps the words and stories arrive. And I think it just kind of inspires that, in the same way that kind of fuel helps a car to run. I think it just gets it going and puts me into the right frame of mind. And I also think there's an aspect of it of kind of hypnotizing myself into thinking I'm not doing anything too difficult and arduous. It makes me feel like this is a very relaxed, nice environment. It's all very pleasant. Oh, look, the TV's on. Or, oh, look, we've got Pride and Prejudice playing on the iPhone or something like that. And I think all of that makes me think, oh, yeah, this is all very, very nice and pleasant and easy. And so even if I'm at a very difficult part of the book, it lulls me into that sense of comfort and security, I think. So there's probably a lot of subliminal things happening, or kind of suggestion parts to the routine that I don't even know, or I'm not even completely aware that they're happening, but they all contribute to making it as smooth as possible.
Now, you're clearly someone who has given a lot of thought to their writing process. I mean, you mentioned that you took a week off work when you went full time as a writer to figure this out. And I know that you listen to the show, so you are concerned with this kind of stuff. I wonder, you're about 8 books in now, you said. Have there been any other methods and techniques that you've trialed and tested that perhaps haven't worked out over the years that have helped you end up with this way of writing?
Oh, that's a good question. There've certainly been a lot of authors' routines or things they do that have inspired me, or at least have kind of like given me ideas for other things. There are a number of episodes actually of your show that I listen to regularly because I find them so inspiring, particularly your episode with Amanda Prowse. I absolutely love that episode. I've listened to that like 9 times. I'm a big kind of repeat listener to podcasts, and I love listening to authors and creators talk about their processes. So yours is of course a big one, and there's a number of others I regularly go back to, and I've got some of my favorite author interviews or interviews with filmmakers or other creatives that I find particularly inspiring. And I remember Amanda talking about how she just writes and writes and writes and absolutely loves it, and kind of the time disappears as she's doing it. And even though I probably have a slightly more structured day, I know exactly what she means, in the sense that, or at least I find, that writing just swallows up time. I could have sat down at 9 a.m. and suddenly it's 11:30 or 11 a.m. and I haven't a clue where those couple of hours just went. For me, I've just been, writing. It's almost like you kind of go into the wardrobe into Narnia and come back and you don't realize that you may have lived a lifetime. But it's I think things like that, I might hear people's experiences or the way they do it, and then sort of adapt them and craft them my own way. For a period, I did do what I kind of think of as the Ian McEwan approach. And I don't want to misquote Ian McEwan, but I remember watching an interview with him where he spoke about how he usually writes to midday and then he reserves the afternoon just for reading. And even though he does sometimes carry on writing, he tries to kind of ring fence that time in the afternoon to read new books. And if I'm at a point of my work, I'm very busy with the writing at the moment, but if I'm at a slightly less busy point, I do try to give myself permission to sometimes do that, to spend the afternoon just reading. And a lot of the time I'm doing other book events with other authors, and I try to read the books of the authors I'm doing book events with and things like that. So it's quite nice to hear other authors doing that, and that almost feels like it gives me permission to do it too. So I think that's the best takeaway. I think a lot of authors are, or a lot of writers, or a lot of creatives, people who have to kind of curate their own time to their own way, are perhaps subconsciously just looking for pointers or permission that, yeah, you're doing it right, it's fine, carry on. So when I see those or hear those, I hold them close, because I'm like, yes, that gives me a sense of credence or reassurance.
And on that, thinking forward, is there any parts of your writing routine and your day that you are looking to change? How are you hoping to improve down the line?
I don't know there's anything I'm actively looking to change. I'm watchful for when change occurs, and it has actually done relatively recently, because I don't normally count the words that I'm writing, or at least I haven't until I've been working on the book I'm doing now. But for a whole series of reasons that are too complicated to go into, I'm writing to a very tight deadline for a book I'm giving to my editor in the autumn, and I only have a matter of weeks to write this one, whereas some books I spend a number of years working on. And I have been keeping an eye on the word count for this one, trying to do at least 2,000 a day, and I've actually really enjoyed it. And I kind of saw that as like emergency measures, because I needed to get this book written quite quickly. But those emergency measures might actually end up becoming normal kind of procedure when I don't have to fulfill that deadline so quickly. So little things like that I might adapt and change as I'm doing a certain book or doing a certain project, and then I might install them and keep hold of them. But yeah, I don't actively seek change, but when it has to occur, I'm happy to give things a go.
How have you felt this 2,000 words a day target affecting what you're writing? I mean, is it changing the quality at all with the quantity?
I don't know. I don't think so, because 2,000 a day for me wouldn't be unusual, even when I'm not writing to a tight deadline. I may even go far beyond that sometimes. So I don't feel like I've had to substantially up the amount I'm writing. It's just helped me to be able to very much keep track that I know I'm on schedule, just to make sure it definitely does come in on time. And I think it's almost helped me realize how much work I'm happy to do, really, because I do love it so much, and I sometimes could write like 5,000 words a day. There are other days when I'll have other stuff to do, and that just isn't possible. But I think I just put that in place just to make sure I didn't feel in the dark, that I knew it was very possible. I could do it. I've probably done it before without realizing. But I think the counting of it, I've quite enjoyed. I quite like things to be quantifiable. So like every book I read and every film I watch, I keep track of everything. I always have done ever since I was a child. I know every single book I've probably read since I was about like 12 or 11, and every film I've watched since probably around the same time. So I'd really like quantifying things, but I'd never quite done it with the amount of words I'd written before that point. I think it was because I didn't want to like sort of punish myself if I didn't feel I'd reached it. Whereas because I generally needed to get it done this time, I thought, well, I'll give it a try, and I have really enjoyed it. So I think I'll probably carry on.
So prior to that, what was the aim every day? I mean, you work for quite a chunk of the day across 2 books, ideally. How did you know what you were hoping to get done before you sat down?
I think, and it probably sounds a bit ethereal, but I think as long as I felt like work had been done, I was happy. And I think I always knew it. It's almost like there's this sort of invisible scales in my head. If I felt like not much had been achieved, I just knew that feeling. Whereas if I came away from my work of that day feeling like I'd moved the story on in some way, or a particular scene or a tricky kind of character moment or plot moment had been done, or if I'd seen parts of my chapter plan turn yellow as I'm highlighting them, that they get done, as long as I had some sense that I was moving things along, I would come away from my laptop that day feeling like work had gone well. So even though I wasn't kind of keeping track of it by numbers, I think I did know kind of within me that I had worked in capital letters. And I know that's a bit vague and that's a bit ambiguous, but I think it's part of the subconscious kind of part of writing.
And because you are quite thorough and strict with how you are working every day, when you are winding down, when your partner comes back, how good are you at switching off? And are you just watching more telly shows until you go to bed? Is it a full day of film and TV?
Quite often, yes. Yes, quite often. I mean, of course, we pause to have dinner or go out for dinner or something like that, or go out and see friends. So there are other things happening other than just fiction consumption all day. Wonderful as that would be, but no, I do like to watch other things in the evening or read books in the evening. But I usually try to reserve that for non-work sort of things. I'm a big believer that anything we read or watch or go to the theatre or go to the cinema or whatever, all of that goes into our writers' brains. I think that's one of the most wonderful parts of the job of being a novelist, is that it's all research, even if we don't know it. It's all going in. But in the evening, I'll watch things that might be deliberately quite different. So it might be something like science fiction or something very light and nice, or like a nice travel documentary, or it's not often factual, but something that may not be part of my normal writing sort of routine. And I'll also read one of the books I've got on the go, and it usually won't be a book that I'm reading for work. It will just be a book that I'm reading for joy, just something I've chosen because I like the cover or something I've been meaning to get to, just to keep a little bit of a difference between the working life and the personal life. But it is a porous boundary, because of course what I do is kind of fiction creation, so it all goes in there.
And I guess the geekiest question, and I'm excited because I think you would have thought this through. What software are you writing on? What font are you writing with?
I am normally writing I'm always writing Microsoft Word. I'm aware other softwares are available, and I have writers' friends who swear by various different softwares. I haven't explored others simply because I worry it would spend me more time figuring out how to get used to them, and I could have written goodness knows how many words in that time. So I happily use Microsoft Word, and I usually use a sort of a margin adapter kind of, I can't remember what they are, but I have notes of how to change the margins to certain amounts just to make the page look a bit like a book. I think it was AJ Finn that said that. It probably was actually on your podcast, where he said he made the pages look like as they would on a book. And we were talking about kind of tricking one's brain into thinking things earlier. I think that really helps in making me realize that this will hopefully one day end up on the pages of a book, and just removes those kind of gaps between the composition and the finished product. So I do that. I set that up on the Word doc, and I choose a font, but that isn't as exciting as it sounds. It's always a serif font. I couldn't imagine writing with a sans serif font, and I think that's because if you pick up a book off the shelf of Waterstones or wherever, you're very unlikely to find a sans serif font inside a book. It does happen, but it's very rare. It's nearly always a serif font. So I either go with something very basic like Times New Roman. If it's something quite dark and gothic-y or scary, because I've got my debut horror book coming out this autumn, and I think for that I probably wrote with something like Georgia or something similar, maybe Baskerville Old Face, something with a little bit of a gothic or sort of scary edge to it. But that's as far as it goes. Nothing too wild. It's usually Times New Roman or a variant of, and that's how I set it up, because I just don't want it to be distracting. And how I set up the page and the software needs to be conducive rather than pulling me out of what I'm writing.
More from Barnaby in just a second. Now, if you're enjoying the show, if you've learned anything along the way that has helped you out, not just in this episode, but in over 300 chats with the best authors around, well, then you can say thank you to us for that, really, and help support the show on our Patreon page. Get involved at patreon.com/writers routine. There is merch, there is bonus content, and there is even a way for your book to sponsor the show. So if you've been thinking about it for a while, and maybe your book is out there and you feel it deserves a bit more press than it's got, a bit more plugging and talking about that it's got, well, let me do that for you. To make that happen, you can support the show. I've got some spots for the next couple of months, and I'd like to see your book there. If it needs to be talked about, let me really, really push it. It doesn't require a lot. Just a little bit helps us carry on. It helps me bring you these chats with the best authors around as often as we can. If you'd like to support us, if you really enjoy the show, it's patreon.com/writers routine. Let's get back to it with B.P. Walter then, who is having a busy year. In July, his novel The Garden Party was published. In August, his debut horror title Scuttle is released. We talk about them both and how it's all ended up being very busy for him. Also, you can hear about the anxiety of doing your job and writing a story and then handing it over to a publisher, hoping they do what they can and they do it well enough so it sells. And you can carry on writing and they can carry on selling. What's it like being in that cycle year after year? Also, hear how he steers clear of stock characters and manages to flesh them out, and why he stays away from absolutist ideas with it. And we jump back in talking about his dreams of being a writer, because they have always been there in one way or another. He read voraciously when he was a child. He's always worked and studied around storytelling. He went to the Faber Academy. He worked as a bookseller, which inspired him and helped him become a book writer. How did he finally realise that dream of being a published author?
It wasn't a straight line. It probably started in my childhood, where I went through probably a period of wanting to be a novelist, particularly when I discovered Agatha Christie and then more contemporary crime fiction. I think I was like, oh, I'd love to do that. But then I probably moved on to other things. So it wasn't a lifelong ambition, but it was certainly part of my growing up. And then I think it was when I was at university, I did film in English for my undergraduate degree. And then I stayed on to do a master's in film and cultural management. And that was very much putting me on a path to going into the business side of the film industry, film distribution or film marketing or something like that. I found all of that really fascinating. But I think it was at some point during that master's, I knew I needed to do something more personally creative. And that's not to say there aren't creative things within those within that industry. There are very creative things within film marketing, but I knew I wanted to tell my own stories, and I was tempted to go into filmmaking for a little bit, but filmmaking involves a lot of other people's time and money, whereas if you're sitting down and writing a book, it's generally your own time and money that you're kind of using or risking, and that appealed to me more. And I had a book idea as well, and my parents were absolutely amazing, so I finished my master's degree and I said I'd like to try writing a book, and they basically allowed me to live at home and write full time for a period. But I did continue working in a bookshop in East London while I was doing that. And that was lovely because that kept me very much sort of in the midst of the kind of on the pulse of what was coming out, what was working, what was selling. And there are a number of books while I was working in the bookshop in Romford that really helped crystallize my ideas as to what I wanted to write, particularly S.J. Watson's book Before I Go to Sleep and Paula Hawkins' The Girl on the Train. Both of those had very big moments while I was a bookseller. So that was really helpful. And the spending a lot of time writing was really helpful. But it did take a number of years, and during that time I changed jobs. I started working in social media, and I had a book which I had tried to get an agent for, which didn't, and then I had another one which had a near miss but didn't. So then I decided that because I didn't have any formal creative writing kind of courses or qualifications or anything like that, I thought I would try the Faber Academy, because I remember reading at the back of S.J. Watson's Before I Go to Sleep that he had done the Faber Library Academy. So I thought I would give that a go. And that was a wonderful, wonderful decision. I really enjoyed that. I had a wonderful tutor called Rowan Coleman, who's a brilliant novelist, and she was brilliant at guiding us in terms of the kind of creative composition aspect of writing, but also the business side of writing. She had a huge amount of insight into how that worked and how the agent kind of selection process or application process worked and what it was like to be published. So that was a really good holistic kind of insight into the world of creative writing, and specifically creative writing with the hope of getting published. And that was a big part of the course. And I was very lucky because my work in progress on that course was the book that I sent out and ended up with my wonderful agent, Joanna Swainson at Hardman & Swainson. And that then went on relatively quickly to then get a 2-book deal with my previous publisher, Avon, at HarperCollins. It kind of went from there. So it was it wasn't a direct kind of straight out the gate kind of sit down at a laptop and then end up with a book deal. But I am mindful that it was slightly less bumpy than some other journeys. But I think everyone's story is sort of relative to them, and it did feel at the time like it was just never going to happen. It really felt like it was just this far off aim that may not occur. Yeah, it thankfully did, and I have my wonderful publishers at One More Chapter at HarperCollins now, and a number of books along, and it's been a really wonderful journey so far.
When you finally get that book deal, then how are you? I guess after the initial joy and elation of having signed the contract is when that wears away. How are you feeling? Because there's a lot of pressure on 2 books, particularly on that second book, because you've done so much work for the first, you know it inside out. But then okay, well, I want to be a writer full time. I need to make sure this second book is as good as the first. How are you feeling and dealing with that pressure of being locked in for 2, but wanting 3 and then 4 and then 5?
I didn't actually have too much for that pressure because there is often a long gap between signing a book deal and then the book coming out. For me, it was just under a year, which is relatively quickly compared to some. I think I signed my initial first book deal in probably around March, April 2018. Then the book came out in February 2019. And by that point, I'd already written 2 other books. So it wasn't as if I was writing with the pressure of my debut already out. And it's also worth noting that it was only my third book that really kind of changed the game for me. My first one didn't really do much at all. It kind of came out and there was a feeling sort of anticlimax really after it arrived into the world. And there's that strange period also between signing the deal and the book coming out when you feel like, oh, this huge thing has happened in your life, something you've wanted for so long, and then not much happens for quite some time. So I just kind of busied myself writing during that time, and I didn't feel the kind of the second book pressure because I already had a lot of them kind of ready to go before they came out. And also my second book came out 4 weeks into lockdown, which was the weirdest time imaginable. So any measure of what was good or what was success has kind of vanished really into thin air because it was so hard to tell. So I think that took a lot of the second book pressure out as well. But I do have a real soft spot for my second book, which is called Hold Your Breath, which really knocked on the doors of the horror genre. It was about a little girl whose mum was taken to a dark forest and went through a series of exorcisms. And even though it was still a psychological thriller, it was taking me much closer to the realm of horror, and which I haven't really revisited until my upcoming book Scuttle. But that was my second book, even though it was a very strange publication in a very odd kind of time period in our history. It was a very special book for me, and it did better than my debut actually, but and I think that helped kind of prep the ground for my third one to then to go on to greater heights. But yeah, that second book was a strange situation, but I don't think anyone's trajectory or story is kind of typical or classic. I think everyone has intricacies or odd parts of how their publication worked, and pandemics aside, I think it's never kind of a normal sort of straight line. I think there's always kind of bends in the road. You
mentioned, was it your third book that's when things started to take off and you were able to do this full time?
Yes, it was my third book, the Dinner Guest. Yes.
What I guess what changed, and at what point could you feel that, oh, okay, this is a bit grander than what's gone before?
Well, I had changed publishers, and I was still at HarperCollins, but I'd moved to a different imprint of HarperCollins, One More Chapter, and which is a digital first imprint. And I presumed the publication of that third book was going to be very different to my previous two, which had been published a bit more sort of like in the classic sense. And everything I expected was completely changed. I think a lot of this, and it's difficult to kind of really fit the puzzle pieces together, but I was very lucky that even though it was lockdown, my second book, Hold Your Breath, did really well in Tesco. It got the Firm Britain's book club and really performed much better than my debut did. So I think I had really good track record of selling well in the supermarkets, even though it was a really difficult retail time. And so when my third book was going to come out through my new publishers, even though it was digital first, it was very lucky at still securing really good supermarket placements. It had really good coverage in the supermarkets. And then it was chosen for a Waterstones Book of the Month, their Thrill of the Month slot. So the cumulative effect of all these things suddenly meant that a book I imagined was going to be published very much in the digital realm suddenly became a very physical book release, and the whole thing kind of pivoted. And so when it came out at the start of April in 2021, shops were still closed by law, but it was in a lot of the supermarkets. And because it had the Waterstones Book of the Month, they did wonderful things in terms of the website and emails and that sort of thing. And I was very lucky because shops opened 2 weeks later. I think it was about the 11th or 12th of April. And that meant people flooded back into bookshops around that time. And I think people were quite hesitant. They didn't know whether people would be tentative of going back into shops. But I think I remember reading that footfall was similar to how it would be kind of at peak at Christmas. It was enormous. And I think by sheer timing, I was so lucky that the Dinner Guest, because it was the Thrill of the Month, was on tables sort of front and centre in every Waterstones across the country. So when that big flood back into bookshops happened, not only had it had wonderful supermarket exposure in the lead up to that already, it then had really good bookshop exposure during that time. So it was sort of like a perfect storm where wherever you went, it was there. It was easy to spot. People were reading it and talking about it on social media. And it was all the things that kind of happened that I'd never really expected or predicted to happen with one of my books. And then when it started charting and going into the bestseller charts, that's when my career completely changed. And it was astonishing and extraordinary and disorienting when it happened. But it was a really magical time, and I'll never forget it.
But how does it feel to be an author in that situation, not necessarily of success, but of both kinds? Of, you've done your job, right? You have written your book, and now you're trusting the publisher and so many different avenues to make sure it tries to sell well. And you were fortunate that, because of your writing, that it was included on book clubs, and you hit the right time because people were very, very avid for books and for getting out of the house and for buying whatever was there. How does it feel to have done your hard work and then to hand the responsibility of actually selling it over to someone else and keep your fingers crossed to a degree?
It's really difficult, and it's something that I think authors talk to each other about all the time, about how little control we really have over these things, how so much other than kind of what the characters do and say and how the plot goes. And even that is guided by, by conversations with editors and agents and edits and that kind of thing. But aside from the book itself, we really have like relatively no control at all. And there's so few things that any author can really do to shift the dial or change things. And we all try, and I do my best to chat to people, do book events, and be kind of evangelical about other authors' works I love and that kind of thing, because I think it's great to be supportive, and all of that's definitely valid and really good to do. But in terms of selling huge numbers, that is really out of your control more often than not. So it can be hard to just kind of sit back and think there's not much I can do to kind of change this. Yes, I think it's good to try, and it's good to do one's best and support each book's release, because that makes the publisher's job easier if an author's supportive. But I think it's also fun to do as little or as much as one wants, because, like I say, it's essentially once you've kind of passed it on and the edits are done, it's out of your hands. The idea for that came to me, I think I was in the gym, and I don't know how it arrived, but I remember I was in the gym, and like most of my book ideas, it arrived more or less fully formed. The ideas I have don't often start as a whisper or a single thing. They normally arrive straight away as one big thing. I think in the past I've described it almost as like a painting. It's just there. Everything about it is there. All the characters, all the plot, all the twists and turns, it's there immediately. And there's sometimes a degree of discovery when I'm doing the planning and the plotting, and I think, that actually won't work, or I'll change that person, that kind of thing. But usually most of it's there straight away as one idea. Normally, I can be quite good at going back through my thoughts around that time, maybe what I was reading or watching at that time, or what was in the news, and think, that was the bit, that was the thing that caused that thought to happen. With the garden party, very frustratingly, I don't know if I know what the thing was. I remember being really compelled by the idea of there being, so the central kind of the central pitch or the central synopsis of the garden party is that there's a big family gathering for a very posh affluent family called the Moncriefs, and their son Raphael is getting married to his fiancée Lauren, and they're having a lovely party to celebrate this. But at the party, there is their adopted son, Harris, who is a boy they took in when his parents, their family friends, were killed in a car crash. So he's there at the party, he's sort of part of the family, sort of not. And he chooses this day to be the day that he's going to tell everyone how awful this family actually is. And he's going to tell all the audience within a speech all the crimes his family have committed against him, or the grievances he's kind of got. And we go back to find out the major crimes of the Moncrief family and see what they did and why he really does have the right to complain at this party. But the added kind of sting in the tail is that once he's said his speech, people start to fall down, possibly dead, at the party. So there is maybe murder afoot. We don't know how, and we don't know why, and we don't know who, but all of it is linked up to the crimes of the Moncrief family. So yeah, that's the general kind of the idea around the book. And I remember finding this this general kind of like, almost like one line sort of thing. There's a party, there are secrets, they all come out, and people start dropping dead. I found that really exciting. As soon as I had that, I knew I wanted to write the book. And I told my editor, I think, about it relatively early, and started plotting it out. So by the time it came to writing it, in the sense that it was needed, I was already quite far along, because it was one that I just couldn't wait to get started on.
So you can't wait to get started, and you mentioned at the start that you do plot quite thoroughly, because you've got this not quite concise and contained, I guess, one sheet that's filled with ideas and maybe pictures. And when you've got that initial idea, however it came to you, of a party, secrets being revealed, people start dropping dead, how are you building up the plot before you start writing?
I think it's during the chapter plan that the plot really takes shape. Although, as I said, it doesn't often change that much from the central idea that I have. Sometimes characters kind of dictate what needs to happen in the plot. If someone's, a particular type of person, there needs to be things that happen that signpost that as we go along. It's just to make sure things aren't jarring. So sometimes scenes or chapters as a whole maybe are created to serve that purpose. But that's the level of discovery, and I do like that. But there's a lot about the process that isn't as much discovery and more just getting it down so I won't forget it. And I do have plans that I plot out in great detail and then save them to my hard drive and may not come back to for a year or two or more. I've got some on there that I had ideas for in 2018, 2019, and that I haven't yet written. And I'm very lucky that I couldn't imagine being without book ideas. I have them all the time, and I'll plot them out and save them. And I was talking to another author recently at Harrogate, and the analogy I used was in the BFG, he goes out and captures dreams, and he has his dream kind of cave with all the dreams in jars. And I like to think of my folder on my computer as kind of like the BFG's dream jar kind of archive. As long as I've got them captured and I've got them in there, I can then use them when I need to.
Yeah, that's a brilliant way of formatting that. So you're filling out your plot, how thorough it is using these chapter points. What about the characters then? Something like this might be rife for, I guess, stock characters and rather cliched, rich family, orphaned boy. How are you fleshing those characters out enough to tell their story?
Well, I think my main thing that I try to carry through most of my books, and a lot of my books feature sort of affluent families that may have done terrible things. And I really don't like reading books where there's just a very kind of absolutist view of people, like as in like, you're rich, you're bad. Or, you've done this, therefore you're beyond redemption. You're a saint, you're a sinner. I think absolutes make fiction dull quite quickly. So I kind of see every book is essentially you're kind of like swimming in a world of grey, and just people are different shades of grey. The line I always come back to, I think it's one of the best lines ever written, was in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, where I think it's Professor Lupin that says it in the book. In the film, it's Sirius Black, but I think it's Professor Lupin, and he says to Harry, the world isn't divided into good people and Death Eaters. And that, I think, goes to the heart of every character I write. I think, this character isn't necessarily a good character, and he or she may not be a Death Eater. They're somewhere in between, and everyone's somewhere in between. So in order to avoid the archetypes, I just make sure they are shades of grey rather than a clear-cut kind of evil monster. And even people in the books that do the worst possible things, I think there needs to be some humanity or some grains of decision making or things that people will find like hard not to empathize with, because that's how real life is. And I think we use these books as a mirror to real life, and of course things are a bit tidier, things are tied up a little nicer, but I do like to have a lingering feeling of doubt about a lot of the characters, because I think that's how they hopefully to the reader stay memorable.
And while we're here, let's talk about the horror novel then. This is coming out around Halloween time. This is Scuttle, which is, as you've said, you've dabbled with horror through thrillers before, but this is the debut strict horror story. And you've said how you like to write two books on the go at the same time. How has this found its way being published?
This was a bit of a weird one, actually, because I had this idea and I remember talking to my partner about it, thinking there's no way I'll get away with this under my current kind of BP Walter thriller strand. And I sent the idea to my agent with a kind of like, lol, this will never happen sort of attitude about it. And I was very surprised when it did end up happening, because I've always tried to nudge the parameters of the thriller genre, and I really love it. It's one of the most loveliest things when people message me to say how much they've enjoyed my books and how they find each one different to the one before it, which is what I try to do. And incidentally, I should say, all my books are connected. They all take part in the same world. Characters go back and forth. They're all standalones, can be read in completely different orders. It doesn't matter, but they are all connected in various ways. But I do like each one not to feel like the one before. I wanted to kind of be a different colour. If it was kind of a sheet of colours, they all have a different tone. But I knew this idea for the horror book was so different in terms of tone, in terms of content. It goes into things that just absolutely couldn't happen. I knew it was going to be a different beast. It was going to be a trickier thing. And I was just really lucky that my agent absolutely loved the idea. And I think we just mentioned it in conversation to my current editor at HarperCollins. And I was absolutely thrilled, surprised and thrilled when we were able to sign a separate book deal for that horror book and stay with my existing publisher for that one, and but do it as a separate thing. And we're doing it under Barnaby Walter rather than BP Walter, just to kind of keep it sort of the same but a bit different, to kind of indicate that it's of a different genre. Not that there needs to be much indication because there's a big spider on the front of it. but yeah, in terms of plot wise, it's about it involves spiders. It's about a teenage boy called Hudson who goes to the woods on Halloween night to this big forest. It is actually the same forest that's in my second novel, Hold Your Breath. It's set in the same place, but he goes to the forest at night, and his friends play a horrible trick on him, which causes him to become very ashamed and embarrassed and angry. And this causes a transformation within him, or maybe not causes, but at least cues up a transformation within him, where he starts to transform into an enormous and very deadly spider, and someone ends up dead in the forest. And these transformations continue to occur, and it's impossible for him to hide what's happening to him because bodies continue to occur in this rural part of Northumberland. And the book ends up spanning multiple countries and cities, and when we get to the bottom of what's happening to Hudson in the book. But there's still a kind of a clear thriller edge to it. In terms, it has some things that people will be familiar with in my thrillers in terms of different character perspectives and that kind of thing. But there is this kind of central sort of fantasy horror grounding within it, which is totally different to the rest of the books I've written. And that was wonderful and freeing and liberating to write. But I think not too much of a different experience, I think, on the whole. But I think reading it, it will probably be a fairly different experience simply because my other books don't feature enormous deadly spiders.
And that is it for this week's Writers' Routine. Thank you so much to BP Walter. The current novel is The Garden Party. It's out right now. The debut horror novel is Scuttle. It's out in a few months' time. You can find out more online. Thank you so much to Barnaby for coming on the show. We'll be back next week with another fantastic author. In the meantime, you can support us, patreon.com/Writers' Routine, and you can get in touch with the show too. If there's anything that you'd like to point out, if you just want to say hey, drop me a note, get to the contact page at writersroutine.com. And I will see you next week with a brand new episode. Until then, bye.